I'm with Jordan Sekulow. He's the Executive Director of the American Center of Law and Justice. Good to be with you.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me.
This is the first time we've met, but I've heard the name Sekulow quite often lately. I've seen it on television, and obviously this center does quite a bit. First of all, I want you to tell us what the center does.
Sure. At the American Center for Law and Justice, we focus a lot on the issues domestically at home when it comes to religious liberty, religious freedom, the First Amendment, the constitutional issues. We have this broad constitution in America which says Congress should not establish a religion, but also that we have the free exercise. And that's all it says. So that definition, what those words, each word means, is being constantly looked at and defined in the courts. And so we represent primarily those on the religious side, fighting back against those who want to continue to secularize America in a sense and make it look, I think, more European, where God is immediately taken out. Even the references to generic references, we call it kind of a civic faith that we have in America. On the international side, which is actually my focus, it's more on the issue of the persecuted church. And I will tell the audience, which may be surprising, it's a story actually I was going to tell at the conference today. But that we haven't talked about often is that we got involved not just in Europe, but specifically for the persecuted church. When I talk about the persecuted church, the church in the predominantly Muslim world, and some of the other countries, the totalitarian countries, there was the Bible Society, it's called. It was in the Gaza Strip, and the owner was 30 years old, younger than me. And Rami Ayad, his wife was pregnant with his third child. Mostly was an internet cafe and a place for predominantly Muslims, actually, to get materials and like basic necessities, food and water. He did have Bibles there, but it was not like he was on a street corner trying to convert everyone to Gaza Strip. And of course, this was after the Hamas takeover. And one day he was taken and killed in the streets by Hamas. And because of the dwindling Christian population in Gaza, there were very few places for him to be buried or to have a funeral. And the Greek Orthodox Church there actually had the funeral for him, even though he was not Greek Orthodox, and buried him in the Greek Orthodox cemetery. And they walked down the street, and I remember the priest with the cross through the streets of Hamas-controlled Gaza. And that was working with that family to secure her immediate departure with the family out of the Gaza Strip into a safer territory, was really one of our first experiences with the persecuted church.
Why is it, I mean, people talk about the persecuted church. Those who study history think of the early centuries. They think of Diocletian and the emperors and the difficulties, the persecution, the slaying, the torture, the martyrdom. When you come to today's so-called, quote-unquote, civilized world, you wonder, why is this happening? I mean, can you, from your perspective, share something on that?
Sure. I think there's this new brand of persecution. Those of us in the West, for the most part, don't experience, we don't ever call what happens in the United States when we have these battles persecution. We say that, sometimes there are times when religion is put to a side, or that it's, you could say that people are almost paranoid of religion, but not persecuted, and we're not going to die because of our faith specifically, and except that would be very rare. There are these Christians now around the world, and it's happening not just to new emerging, I'd say the convert community, which is more controversial in the Muslim world, but we're seeing it in the Orthodox churches as well. Inside the mainstream churches that have existed in these parts of the world, the headquarters of the Christian churches around the world, the beginnings, whether it's the Coptic Christians of Egypt who are now being pushed out, I think we've seen, it's almost, in a sense, here we are in Germany, a final solution for much of the Muslim world, which is to eradicate Christianity and Christian symbols. So it's not only the people they want gone, they want the churches as well. And that's happened, of course, with the Orthodox Church in places like Turkey, which are on the I'd say, at a very different scale than a place like Iran on paper. Yes. But when you actually look at what's happening, the Christian populations of the two it's the same. Both are dwindling. The only growing Christian population in the Muslim world now is in Israel, which is really just a testament to who Israel is allowing in their Arab community.
And very much open there, no doubt about it. For our perspective here, we're in Berlin. We're here for the Religious Freedom Conference. How does that interplay in what you do? How do you see this developing?
This is very important, I think, for all religious people and those who understand the human right of why the religious freedom is so important. One, I think to see the Orthodox Church speaking out, to talking about your own issues, to broaden it out for the Christian persecution community and for those who believe that religious freedom and the fight for religious freedom, to see that it's not just those on necessarily the new converts on the street corner, but that this issue of the early church, the church that was there before the evangelical church, before the Protestant churches, are also being pushed out. And so for me to be part of this, that's a message. We've worked closely with the Archons before on a number of different issues involving this kind of interplay, which we don't have in our own country in the United States, but even in Western Europe, where there's an interplay between the government and the religious leaders, where the government has a say in who the head of your church could be, and not the people, and not necessarily those who are ordained. But it is actually a government issue. And so while we believe that ultimately we hope to be able to have one day the kind of fights, legal battles, we call them fights, not physical, but fights that we have in the United States, in the countries we're talking about, but that we know that we're at a baseline there. We're at a point where we just want to get to that discussion level. And so that's what I hope comes from this conference, is that we as organizations and as human rights groups and also as religious people come together and realize we can't allow and say, well, if it's we've got an American pastor we represent imprisoned in Iran, but that's no less important than fighting to keep the Orthodox community in Turkey. What's there. If we don't, there will be an eradication, whether it's by departure, whether it's by leaving the country, which has happened in Egypt and places throughout the Arab Spring that we could call the Islamist uprising, really, Syria, the list goes on. Because if we do lose our roots, we've lost our roots. We've lost our home base for where the history is, where we can see the sites of the apostles and the disciples. And so what we're seeing now is the Orthodox Church, the Coptic Church, and others finally, I think, speaking out and realizing that while they were for some period of time tolerated and it was part of a longer-term plan by, I think, these evil forces who want to not even let people have the opportunity to walk by a cross. I mean, literally, that's how mundane some of these issues can seem on paper, is that they don't want churches built, and they will do anything they can to stop it. So we're here to combat that.
Finally, if you look at history, many times walls have been built, and we talked about that yesterday at length. We were here for many, many hours at the conference, and people put those walls up initially to protect the inhabitants.
Right.
And then after time, the inhabitants didn't like certain things going on, and then they put up walls in order to keep them in and to oppress them. Right. In this sense, we're trying to take down walls.
Right.
So I want you to put on your futures cap here and think to the future. What do you see happening? I mean, we see some increase. Maybe it's decreasing. From your perspective, where are we going?
I think we're talking about it a lot more. I know that from the European side, which is a very secular approach, very different than our American approach, where we kind of have this idea of a creator who gave us our rights. And we can all agree to that, even if we have different religious backgrounds, different theologies. We agree in this kind of higher power. In Europe, it's very secular. But yet Europeans have finally put religious freedom at the top. You go through, starting with our own Constitution, but also the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the European Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social Rights, all signed, by the way, by Turkey. These covenants, except for the U.S. Constitution, and they want to, of course, still try to become part of the European Union. So they would have to accede, and they actually have, to the Universal Declaration because they're part of the Council of Europe, which is a broader organization. And yet their own constitution allows religious education only by the state. And I think we can take our American, and I think also the European background, the Western background, to understand that any true there's no freedom if there's not freedom of religion. And if you think about that just quickly, freedom of religion means freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and the freedom to assemble. So you get all of those with freedom of religion. And so I think that's where we are right now. But we're at a point, at a crossroads, where either the Christian community to survive will leave, and it won't mean that Christianity is gone, but it will mean that we have left the right, or that we're fighting back. And I think that what we're starting to see through conferences like this, in the appropriate diplomatic ways, is to fight back strategically rather than just to say, well, this is so horrible, but we're doing something about it now. And that's the difference.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Father.